and welcome to another exciting lecture in medical terminology. In this lecture, we're going to study Chapter 7, the urinary system. This is part 1 of our lecture series consisting of the introduction, anatomy of major organs, and the physiology on how the kidneys produce urine. So let's go ahead and get started. Here are the goals that we hope to accomplish by the end of this chapter. Name essential organs of the urinary system and describe their locations and functions. Identify common pathological conditions, recognize how urinalysis is used and interpreted as a diagnostic test, and define urinary system related combining forms, prefixes, and suffixes. Additional goals: list and explain clinical procedures, laboratory tests, and abbreviations that pertain to the urinary system, and understand medical terms in their proper context, such as medical reports and records. So let's go ahead and get started. Your body needs to attain the energy that it needs in order to function the way it needs to function. For example, if you need to study for an exam or a test, or you want to go on a bike ride, you need to be able to attain the energy from your environment in order to power your cells, to power your tissues, to get it to move. But not all the foods that you eat are going to be used up by your cells. And sometimes some of the foods that you consume are going to be released out as wastes. In this case, in some types of foods that you do eat, your cells processes them and then releases them out as nitrogenous wastes. There are 3 types of nitrogenous waste. The first one here is known as urea. The next one is known as creatinine, and the last one is known as uric acid. Now here's something very important that I want you to remember. The body produces nitrogenous waste with an OUS suffix at the very end, not nitrogen waste. Okay, because nitrogen is an atom that you find on the periodic table. It is an element out there in the world, but it is not a descriptive word. So nitrogenous is a descriptive word to describe the type of waste that you have. Let's go ahead and talk about each of those nitrogenous wastes one by one. The first one here is urea. And urea, another name for urea is known as carbamide. Carbamide. And on the right hand side, we have here the molecular structure. Don't get into too much of the detail about this, but check this out. We do here have something known as an amine group. An amine group consists of the letter N. We have there the H and the 2. That's an amine group. And then right here at this vertice, there is this little kind of a upside down V shape. At that vertex is a carbon atom. Again, I don't want to get into too much detail about this, but that is a carbon atom. And right here above that is this letter O that indicates the oxygen atom. And here, this carbon atom is double bonded to the oxygen atom. So this would be a carbamide, also known as urea. And this here is a carrier of the waste nitrogen. Another nitrogenous waste here is creatinine, and these forms from the breakdown of creatinine phosphate in the muscles. Now, this type of nitrogenous waste is synthesized in the liver and removed by your kidneys via glomerular filtration, proximal tubular secretion. As you can see on the right hand side, we have here yet another molecular structure of creatinine, and what you see here are 2 different forms that you'll find existing out there, and these are known as resonance structure because the double bond here kind of flip-flops between different atoms. But again, I don't want to get into too much detail about that. More details about resonance structures in an organic chemistry class, but this is medical terminology, so we're just going to leave it at that. And the last type of nitrogenous waste is known as uric acid. Now, this is the product of metabolic breakdown of deoxyribonucleic acid, also known as DNA. And this kind of DNA here is from a purine nucleotide. Now, just for your information, there are 2 types of nucleotides. One are known as the purines, and another one here is known as the pyrimidines. But again, not too much detail about that. We're just going to stick with what's on this slide. Now, this happens. Uric acid happens when there's a high concentration of when there are high concentrations of uric acid in the blood. That leads to a condition known as gout. And gout here is a type of arthritis that contains uric acid crystals in your joints. So, as an individual with uric acid moves in their joints, it starts to feel very painful because those crystals start to kind of cause little irritations against the nerves, and that's why a lot of individuals with arthritis experience pain there. Now, these are associated with diabetes and kidney stones, and the condition of having high uric acid levels in the blood is known as hyperuricemia. Hyperuricemia is spelled right over here. Hyperuricemia. On the right hand side is yet another molecular structure of uric acid. As you can see, if you were to take a biology textbook or a molecular biology textbook and look at the structure of pyrimidines or purines, you would see that there is this nitrogenous base. All DNA, just for your information, DNA here has three general structures. This is known here as a ribose sugar. We have here a nitrogenous base indicated as the letters NB, my diagram, and then we have here known as the phosphate groups. Those would be the three general pieces that make up a DNA or RNA molecule, or also known as a nucleic acid. Now, what you see here, this image right over here, uric acid, this portion here you would find very common here as a type of nitrogenous base. But in this case, since it is released out from your metabolic processes, that nitrogenous base component is what that uric acid is. It's released out, and this is flowing in your blood and is ready to get filtered out through your kidneys. Now let's go ahead and talk about the function of the kidney. You're probably wondering, okay, well, we're talking about the urinary system. That kidney's got to be involved somehow. Well, you're absolutely correct. The kidney here filters nitrogenous waste to form a liquid compound known as urine, and about 200 quarts of blood are filtered every day to form 2 quarts of urine. Can you imagine? Every single day 200 quarts of your blood are going through your kidneys to form 2 quarts of urine. So imagine having to excrete 2 quarts a day. And now the kidneys help you to maintain proper balance of water and different kinds of electrolytes. For example, sodium and potassium are known as different kinds of electrolytes, or atoms containing a charge, a net charge on them. And as well, they help to maintain the proper balance of different kinds of acids in your system. Your kidneys also help to adjust the amount of water and electrolytes for proper muscle and nerve function. And your kidneys also release out different kinds of hormones, 3 of which we're going to go ahead and talk about here. The first one here is known as renin, which is a type of enzymatic hormone that is important in adjusting blood pressure. Another kind of hormone here is erythropoietin. The medical abbreviation for this is EPO, not to be confused with EPA, it's EPO. And this is a hormone that stimulates red blood cell production in your bone marrows. And lastly, we have the hormone here, calciferol, which is the active form of vitamin D necessary for the absorption of calcium from the intestines. Your body needs calcium in order to build bone, in order to do other kinds of functions, especially for bone. However, you cannot obtain or bring in that calcium into your system unless you have vitamin D. And vitamin D is very much like the spoon that your cells need in order to take in that calcium and to use it to form your bones. Your kidney is also responsible for degrading and eliminating different hormones from your bloodstream. Now, the anatomy of the different major organs. The urinary system between men and women is very similar, but there are some slight differences. For example, let's go ahead and look here on the right-hand side. The right-hand side here consists of the anatomy of the male urinary system. You can see here on the patient's right side and the left side, we do have the common, well-known structure of the kidneys, and those kidneys contain these individual structures in there, which are the parenchyma, or the poster unit of the kidney. And we'll talk about these later, but just to give you the heads up, these are known as nephrons. Okay. Now, there's got to be blood vessels that supply the kidneys with the blood so that your kidneys can filter out those nitrogenous waste. We do have here the renal arteries and the renal veins as well that helps to supply the kidneys and transport that blood into there. We do have here the tube that connects the kidney to the urinary bladder, and that tube right over here is known as a ureter. And you probably remember from an earlier chapter, ureter is that tube that's responsible for carrying urine from the kidney to the urinary bladder, but not to be confused with this other tube here known as the urethra. And a good way to tell the difference between ureter and urethra, because students often confuse these two words, is that ureter has two letter E's in them, and you have two ureters. Versus the urethra only has here one letter E, but you only have one urethra. Now, as you can see here, we've got that sac, that urinary bladder, and the region in here is known as the trigony, or the trigon. And of course, beneath the urinary bladder in men is known as the prostate gland. More about the function of the prostate gland in the male reproductive system. Now, that urethra is what is very different between men and women. As you can see here on the right hand side is the female anatomy of the female urinary system. The women, of course, have the common kidneys as men do. And above that, in both men and women, there is this gland known as adrenal gland, which produces a lot of different kinds of hormones. For example, cortisone is a type of hormone that is produced there by that adrenal gland. Of course, women, just like men, also have the ureter that connects between the kidney and the urinary bladder. That urinary bladder is right here. Now, here's the thing though. As you can see here, the urinary bladder in women versus that in men, it is very common, but it's that urethra right over here. Check this out. In men, you can see that the urethra is significantly longer compared to that of women. Women here only have a urethra between 2 to 3 centimeters in length versus that here in men. Men have around 10 to 12 inches there in length. So as you can kind of see here, it's tremendously different, which is why women are always encouraged there to go to the restroom when nature calls, is because the bacteria from the external environment to travel 2 centimeters, it doesn't take that long compared to that in men where men have 10 to 12 centimeters of urethral length. It takes forever for bacteria cells to travel up that urethra here and land themselves in the urinary bladder, where you have a very dark, you have a very damp, and you have a very warm environment. 3 ideal conditions for growth of microbes and bacteria. Okay. However, for men, by the time the bacteria even travels 5 centimeters up the urethra, the men are probably ready to void, which is the medical term for urination, voiding. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. So again, women, you should definitely be urinating, you should definitely be voiding, and when nature calls, to avoid something known as a urinary tract infection, a UTI. At least that's what I recommend. Okay. So let's go ahead and move on. That trigon here, I'm sorry, just to kind of, it is that triangular region at the base of the bladder where the ureter enters and the urethra exits. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about them. Review the ureter. Here's one of the 2 muscular tubes that carry urine in peristaltic waves from the kidney to the urinary bladder. And peristalsis, just like in the digestive system, your esophagus has to squeeze that food down. Same thing with your intestines. The ureters also have to do the same. They have little mini muscle contractions that help to push that urine down into your urinary bladder versus just sitting up there in your kidneys. You also have the urinary bladder as well, which is a hollow muscular sac in the pelvic cavity that is a reservoir for urine. So it stores that urine there so that people can kind of hold it a little longer and urinate when it's more convenient, obviously. And you do have here that urethra, which is a membranous tube that carries urine from the urinary bladder to the outside of the body. Now, just like I mentioned earlier, that medical term that means to actually urinate is voiding. As you can see that word voiding here, but another medical term is micturition, okay, which is less commonly used. Urination and voiding are more commonly used out there in the field. But micturition, It's just another word out there. Now, urine here is you release through an external opening of the urethra known as a urinary meatus. And now, just to let you guys know that my on-campus lecture class had confused this many times, and I want to clarify that now for you guys, that the urinary meatus is not synonymous, and I repeat, is not synonymous to the male penis. And the thing is that a lot of students, when they read the word urinary meatus, for some odd reason, it kind of links their thoughts or something to the male penis. You read that word very carefully. Definitely is not that, but just to let you guys know, it is not the opening. It is the opening. I'm sorry, it is opening at the end in order to help release urine out to the external environment, but it is not the actual organ itself. So don't confuse that there, even though it's highly, people are highly susceptible for thinking that, but don't think that. Okay, so I've clarified it now. Let's move on. So here's how the kidneys produce urine. As you can see here on the right hand side, we do have our kidneys. We do have the internal medulla, which is that centermost region here, and then we have here the outer portions of the kidney as well. Now, as you can see, we do have the renal arteries and the renal veins. The blood enters the kidneys through the right and left renal arteries, okay? Because don't forget the arteries carries blood away from the heart. Now, the renal arteries then branches into smaller vessels. Obviously, they branch into smaller arteries and the arterioles. I hope you guys remember what the "-iole" suffix stands for, right? If not, go back and review that. And then finally, they land themselves into a structure known as a glomeruli, which is located throughout the entire cortex of the kidneys. Arterioles and carries blood to the smallest type of vessel that you can find in there, and these are known as capillary vessels. Very small, and capillaries are one red blood cell thick in wide in length. And the function of the glomeruli here is to filter the blood and to extract out the nitrogenous waste from the blood and to concentrate it in the form of urine that will eventually be expelled out from your body. So as you can see here, each one of these little structures here are known as a glomeruli. But now here's the thing though, this diagram here is a cartoon rendition of what the kidney looks like. This is not the number of glomeruli. As you see, you have millions of glomeruli that are inside of your kidney, millions of them. So just don't take this image as being the actual image of a kidney. It's just a cartoon image. All right, so now here's the glomerulus and glomerular, also known as the Bowman's capsule. Here being called that. As you can see here, we have the blood that is traveling through the afferent renal arteriole, AFF. Afferent renal arteriole. Then the blood enters into this capsulate region right over here, known as that Bowman's capsule. As you can see, the capillaries branch out to more little mini vessels, and the reason why, because you want to have those so the Bowman's capsule can take the most amount of surface area and to extract that nitrogenous waste. As you can see here, the that the capillaries here, now we have different sugars are being extracted out, water, urea and waste and salts are being extracted out, and then finally clean blood exits out here through the efferent renal arteriole. However, it's not finally processed. We'll find out later that the blood in there receives back a lot of the water and a lot of the sugars and a lot of the different things that your body needs. So you're probably asking yourself the question, why would at the Bowman's capsule that they would take out sugar and water, urea and waste? And here's the thing though, think about yourself trick-or-treating on Halloween. After you come back home and you have a whole bag of candy, you would probably agree with me. There might be some bars that you like and some candy bars that you don't. But you have this massive bag and you've got to sort them out. So what you do is you probably pour them out on a table or on the floor and you kind of lay them out in front. And then you probably separate the candy, maybe the hard candy in one pile, then the soft candy in another pile. That's what your blood is doing. Your blood is trying to sort out maybe some solutes and some hard substances out, maybe some water to go along with it too, because it's not perfect. It's not going to pick and choose just yet. It's just going to sort them out, maybe put them in batches. And then later down this tubule, then the kidney starts to get more specific, put back substances that the body needs and keep out substances that your body does not need. So think about what's going on here as sorting out candy on Halloween. So there are three steps to the formation of urine here. Step one is actually filtering out the waste, and a lot of times water comes out with it, sugars, and that's okay. The kidney will resort them out later. So again, here we go. Water, sugars, different waste, and salts gets filtered out. And it pulls out mainly solutes as a batch for later sorting. And that will be here, glomerular filtration. The second step here is tubular reabsorption, where water, sugar, and some salts, which are needed by your body says, you know what, I'm going to take some of you guys back in. And so that's what's going on here in tubular reabsorption. The outer renal tubule right over here is known to be a semi-permeable. This here is known as semi-permeable. And the reason why it's called semi-permeable is because it picks and chooses what crosses that tube wall, but it doesn't let everything go through. But then that word would be permeable, and it doesn't block everything from crossing through. Otherwise, that would be known as impermeable. Okay, so again, the water, sugar, some salts are filtered back in, and it retains those essential substances. And I like to think of this part of the filtration process as this sorting process. Okay, so that would be this part right over here. And the last of the three steps in the formation of urine is known as tubular secretion, where waste, some water, some salts and acids, potassium, and drugs, gets filtered out. And this further concentrates a sorted batch. Now here's the thing though, you're probably asking yourself, wait a minute, I've probably heard from my friends and my family that I need to drink 8 glasses of water a day because my cells need them. Well, here's the thing though. Did you know that the urine that comes out of your body down the toilet is 95% water and 5% nitrogenous waste? That includes urea, creatinine, salts, acids, and drugs. I'm sorry, yes, it contains those. So you're asking, wait a minute, so I thought my body needs that water. Here's the thing. If your body just excreted out this waste, it would be too toxic to your body and will start to cause cancerous cells to form in your body. So your body has to dilute. So why water in urine? It is to dilute. Dilute so it is not at toxic levels. Is not at toxic levels. That's why you drink so much water a day. That's why it's recommended to drink at least 8 glasses worth of water a day. It's because not only does your body need it for its metabolism, but also your body needs it to form that urine so that that urine does not become so toxic. And now here's the thing. You can tell if you're drinking enough water by looking at the color of your urine. If your urine is close to clear, you have an excellent amount of water in your system. Your body is able to handle that. But if your urine starts to turn kind of amber in color and toward dark brown, that means that you are dehydrated. You might not feel dehydrated, but you are getting there toward becoming dehydrated. So at that time, it's recommended that you go ahead and drink down some more water so that it starts to help with your urinary system and helps with your cellular metabolism. Now, let's go ahead and zoom all the way into that kidney. If we go back here a couple slides, you can see if we were to zoom all the way in, okay, just imagine that picture. We're going to zoom all the way in. You'll come across the fundamental unit of the kidney, and that is known as the nephron, not to be confused with neuron, okay? Neuron is spelled differently, so don't confuse that. Now, the nephron is a combination of the glomerulus and the renal tubule. There are more than 1 million nephrons in the kidney. So you can see here's the general structure of that nephron. Here's the renal artery that's coming in here. As you can, maybe my pen's not showing up a nice color. Let me change that color maybe to a blue color so you can see. Or how about purple? Because we're going to deal with blue later. Green. Here, green. So you can see here Blood is entering into the Bowman's capsule. As you can see, the capillaries here, all of the wastes and salts and water getting pulled out, just as we've learned a few slides ago. And then now cleaner blood's being filtered out. However, your system has to reabsorb back in some of those essential nutrients like water and some sugars and salts. So and then those so and then those the blood travels down here, down the descending. This tube right here is known as the descending tubule. And this is known as the ascending renal tubule. Okay, so as it goes down and up, it starts to process, starts to filter out and sort the batch on what goes back into the blood and what stays in the urine. Now, as you can see here earlier in the earlier slide, we have here a collecting tubule where urine will then travel and make its way toward the urinary bladder. But imagine you have millions and millions of these collecting tubules. They all have to congregate and collect somewhere. So you can see here we have the renal pelvis. This renal pelvis where we have tons of those little mini collecting tubules that come together and start to bring that urine together. Each of these little cup-like regions here are known as calyces, which are small cup-like regions in the renal pelvis, and the term comes from the Greek calyx, which is the meaning of a cup or case surrounding a flower bud. Now the renal pelvis narrows to form that ureter right down over here, so you can see that urine starts to travel down this tube there. So this is an illustration that shows that section of the kidney. I would definitely want to know this chart. This is the pathway in which urine is being formed and expelled out. So of course, your body takes the energy from the foods and the materials from the air that you breathe in. They bring it into your red blood cells. Those red blood cells transfers them and brings them to your tissues. And then your tissues releases out a lot of those waste products like nitrogenous waste into the bloodstream. So that is the first step right over here, the bloodstream. And then the bloodstream then narrows out into the renal artery somewhere in its pathway, and then it goes into the glomerulus right over here, where water and sugar and salts and urea, other wastes are being filtered out through that glomerular capsule and then into that renal tubule. And what ends up happening here is that now water, sugars, and salts get reabsorbed back into the bloodstream. And while the bloodstream here is secreting out different acids, potassium, and drugs back into the renal tubule there, as we've talked about earlier. And then they all collect at the renal pelvis, where they travel down that ureter, store themselves into the urinary bladder, until such time as when the body's ready to release that urine, it travels through that urethra. And don't forget, men and women have different lengths in the urethra. And then out here through that opening known as a urinary meatus. Okay, not urinary meatus, urinary meatus. And therefore the urine leaves the body. I would definitely want to know. Okay, this pathway, I would definitely want to know. I would definitely want to star that because it's very important that you know that pathway. Okay, I hope that you found this part 1 of the lecture series very helpful and very educational. Let me know what you think. Give me a couple comments or maybe some suggestions, and I will see you in part 2 of this lecture series. Until then, I'll see you next time.